Languages Manager at language learning company uTalk. In this video, we're here to talk about false friends and where to find them. Now, I want you to picture the scene. You're a young, impressionable languages student who's just moved to Spain, and everything is new. The people are new, the food is new, and the language is new. It's a lot to take in. Your brain is frazzled, and you feel the need to re-energise with a sugar rush before your next class. So you stop by a bakery on your way. Feigning confidence, you fake it until you make it, right? You walk up to the counter and in your best acento castellano, say, "Quiero un gato, por favor." You already speak fluent French, so in your mind, "I want a cake," un gato, sounded fine. French and Spanish have many lexical similarities, after all. But when you hear your voice out loud to the shopkeeper, you remember that gato in French sounds like gato in Spanish, which means cat. Definitely not what you had in mind. The shopkeeper's face says it all. False friend alert. How to recover from this situation? What to say next? Think fast. Best to be honest and admit your Spanish is not that great yet. And laugh off your embarrassment. Estoy embarazada, you say, chuckling, only to realise, double false friend alert, that whilst embarazada is a word in Spanish, it does not mean embarrassed, unlike the similar sounding word in English. No, it means pregnant. Now, pregnant women can be known to get cravings, but the cats, not so much. Now, this is a true story. It happened to a friend of mine. Needless to say that after this experience, they committed the Spanish word for cake to memory and never confessed to being embarazada again. False friend language slip-ups certainly have a habit of helping us learn fast. But did it impact on their confidence to mess up again? Honestly, maybe a little. They still made plenty of false friend mistakes. In fact, they probably crashed into every false friend under the sun in their language learning journey to fluency. But they had a lot of fun along the way and learned some very valuable language lessons, which I would like to share with you today. Just to give you a bit of background before we begin, at uTalk we have a very international office, so although our common language for communication is English, as we're based in the UK, it goes without saying that I have no shortage of false friend anecdotes to share with you. What's more, our app called uTalk Learn Any Language has over 140 languages to learn, so I've taken full advantage of the linguistic richness to put this talk together to give you some memorable examples of different areas where false friends are likely to crop up during your travels or indeed when you meet new people on home turf. And I hope that this will help make you a more effective and confident communicator. Not only that, but as polyglots, we are always on the lookout to make connections between languages, right? So it's a fun and fascinating process to discover the stories behind these links, even when it comes to languages that are separated by thousands of miles and huge cultural differences. It helps us to see that despite this, as humans, we're all interconnected and interdependent, and I think that is a beautiful thing. So let's get going. First of all, what exactly is a false friend? Well, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, a false friend is a word or expression that has a similar form to one in a person's native language, or in the case of polyglots, L2, L3, or L10 language, but a different meaning. Let's head to Southeast Asia for our first practical example from the Austronesian language family. Now, it may come as no surprise that there are many lexical similarities between Indonesian and Malay and Filipino. We can consider these to be cousin languages. For instance, did you know that good morning in Malay is selamat pagi? But, false friend alert, in Tagalog, this means thank you, stingray. Whilst there are definitely worse false friends out there, it's a source of amusement between the inhabitants of these closely approximated countries and languages, as you can imagine. The technical name for this type of false friend is synchronic interlingual false friends, which essentially categorises words which bear a strong resemblance across multiple languages but have absolutely no common meaning and no common origin. Just pure coincidence. Other examples of this kind of false friend include the English word actual, which actually means in fact, which is often confused with the similar sounding French actuel, or the Spanish term actualmente, both of which mean currently and not as a synonym for in fact. So I've heard many native French and Spanish speakers who are very accomplished English as a second language speakers who frequently make this simple sounding error. Now we can put this down to L1 interference, but we can also attribute this error happening even when you're a very accomplished English as a second language speaker due to the fact that this error was not recognised or it wasn't corrected quickly, and so it became fossilised because they're using this word very frequently. It's a very common word that crops up a lot, and so it can become fossilised very quickly if it goes by undetected. So what's the moral of this story? Well, learn from your mistakes fast, particularly when it comes to everyday items of vocabulary which we use with high frequency. So it becomes harder and harder to correct as time goes on if they're left unchecked. One more unforgettable story which exemplifies synchronic interlingual false friends. An Italian student was catching up with their English teacher who asked them what they'd got up to on the weekend. Not remembering the English word for necklace, but recalling in his native Italian the term collana, and knowing that a similar sounding word does indeed exist in English, the word collar, he tried his luck and came out with, "I bought a collar for my wife on the weekend," much to the amusement of his English teacher. Don't get me wrong, sometimes recalling lexical similarities does help during the language learning process, especially when it comes to learning languages that are related, for example, if they're from the same language family. And I would encourage you to investigate the percentage of lexical similarity between languages if you're learning multiple languages from the same family. Why? This is because it helps as a rough guide of how likely you will be to win at the vocabulary guessing game if you're stuck for a word. For example, French and Spanish have a whopping 75% lexical similarity, as well as following some common patterns. Let me explain what I mean by that. So, take the word piscine in French, for example. In Spanish, it's piscina. And actually there are a great many nouns that end in French with an E that switches to an A in the Spanish equivalent, and all of the rest of the word is identical. So we can kind of call these true friends. Okay, so going back to our initial example of good morning, selamat pagi, let's uncover some more true friends. So we already saw that selamat pagi doesn't work in Filipino, where good morning is actually magandang umaga. Did you know that madangan is the word for good and umaga means morning? In actual fact, across a great many languages, this greeting is indeed composed from the noun morning plus the adjective good. Therefore, if you know the words for good and morning, but are not sure how to greet someone in your target language, well, using this pattern, you can attempt to put two and two together and figure it out on the spot. I have identified in excess of 30 languages from around the world where this works, and you can find all of them on the uTalk app. Let's take Sindhi as a worked example. Suba bakar is good morning in Sindhi. Suba meaning good and bakar meaning morning. What's more, we can see a close relationship between good morning across many Indian languages, such as Urdu, Telugu, and Hindi, to name but a few. Sure, the composition of the greeting may differ. For example, in Telugu and Hindi, they've merged the component parts of good and morning together to form just one word, but the logical pattern is still clear to see. Now, it's hardly surprising that we can notice similarities between Indian languages, but we can also still see similarities moving over to the Middle East. For example, in Arabic, we have Sabaho el-Khair and So el-Khair in Persian. Not only that, but we can see the influence reach even further to other languages that have been influenced by Arabic and Arabic speakers, such as in Somali and Azerbaijani. So this shows us how far-reaching the influence of Asian languages has, and this presumably dates back to the spice trade, but more on that later. So as we started off with a funny false friend between Filipino and Malay Indonesian, we have seen that we can indeed identify connections between other languages, such as Indo-European and Afro-Asiatic, and use this to our advantage, even if it means having to piece together component parts such as a noun and an adjective. Another great example of words that naturally fit together, or we could call these collocations, and can work to our advantage when making connections during language learning, is the term bookshop. Let's move over to Africa this time to work through some examples. So in Chibemba, we have Ituka liapetabo via lukubenka for bookshop, and in Hausa, we have Shagon saya dalitapapi, which literally translates as something like the shop for the sale of books. Now, it may come as no surprise that many languages reference the words shop and book in their translations for the word bookshop. Because we're polyglots, let's dig a bit deeper and follow the trail that more examples bring us. In Georgian, we have Titsnevis Magazia. Titsnevis meaning books and Magazia meaning shop. Now, Magazia in Georgian resembles magazine, which means shop or store in French. Interesting. Now, if you were a Georgian native learning French and hazarding a guess at the word bookshop based on the etymology that you know, you'd be forgiven for thinking that logically in French the translation must be magazine de livre. However, in French they have their own unique word for it, which is not split into component parts, and it's librairie. Wait a minute, that sounds a lot like the English word for library, where you rent books rather than buy them, right? So then, in that case, what is the word for library in French? Well, it's bibliothèque. Confused? Well, both the roots libre and bibli refer to books, and actually we can see the same pattern across a great many European languages. So, for example, in Swedish we have bibliotek, biblioteka in Bulgarian, biblioteke in Albanian, biblioteka in Latvian, and biblioteka in Russian, and they all mean library, not bookstore. However, as I mentioned just a moment ago, we can also trace the morpheme lib, which is another root for the word book, across the various translations for the word library. So we have librarija in Maltese, liabharlan in Irish, laipeli in Tongan, libraria in Cebuano, and librutegia in Basque, and all of these mean library. But just like French, there are other related translations which use the word lib in their related translations for bookstore and not library. For example, libraria means bookstore in Galician, livraria in Portuguese, livraria in Romanian, and library in Albanian. The moral of the story? You might want to check if you have to pay or not before walking away with a load of books. But I think the key principle to bear in mind here is to try and break the word down into its constituent parts where possible and look for clues based on this. So continuing with our bookshop versus library example, if you detect the word shop thrown into the mix, then you can be sure that you do have to pay for the book before walking out of the store. So for example, we have winkel in the Dutch boekenwinkel, the Danish handel in boghandel, Furushi in the Persian kitab Furushi, and bud in the Icelandic bokadbud. Moving on to another pair of words which has been known to cause some confusion amongst polyglots. orange, the name of the fruit, versus orange, the name of the colour. Now in English, we say orange to mean both the fruit and the colour, and many languages do work this exact same way. So we've uncovered some true linguistic friends there. And how did that come about? Well, it probably comes as no surprise that the colour was named after the colour of the fruit. So the fruit came first, and that inspired the choice of the name colour. Okay, so let's go back to the origin of the orange. In Sanskrit, debatably the world's oldest language, Naranga, this was the ancient version of the word orange, sounds not too dissimilar to the word an orange in English, right? And so in French, the name of the fruit is orange, orange, and we have very similar sounding words to the word orange, also in Korean, in Hausa, in Igbo, in Luxembourgish, and in Tagalog. In Tagalog, it's just saying orange, and that's probably because of the American English influence that was imposed on their language during the colonialization of the Philippines. So interestingly, we can, in some languages, trace the root or the morpheme orange in the adjective orange, that is to say the colour, when actually the name of the fruit itself is totally different. So let's look at a few examples for that as well. So in Russian, we have oranshevi, which is the name of the colour, but actually the name of the fruit is appelsin. Some more examples include Norwegian, where the colour is oranse, but the name of the fruit is, again, appelsin. Then we have oransi in Lithuanian for the colour and appelsinas for the name of the fruit. We can also see this pattern in Papiamentu and Southern Sami. So there are a few interesting observations we can make from this specific example. First of all, we've seen several references to the word apple. Hang on a minute, that's a different fruit. So how did that happen? Well, the story goes that the fruit was originally called golden apple, since this was the only fruit that many people knew to compare it to at the time when it first arrived on the shores of Europe. And for some languages, this name is clearly stuck forever, whereas other languages, and English is included in this, decided to break away and make a whole new name for it, supposedly so as not to get it confused with the other popular fruit that we eat here, apples. So it seems likely that the name of the orange came about in around about the 16th century, which is approximately when the Portuguese traders brought this fruit over to Europe from Asia. So actually all citrus fruits, not just oranges, but lemons and limes, they all originated in Asia in the southeast Himalayan foothills. So we're going to look at some other citrus fruits in just a moment, but let's continue dissecting the orange for a few more moments before we do that. So as I mentioned earlier, don't forget that whilst the same name is definitely not always used for the fruit and the colour, there are many instances where this is exactly what has happened, just like in English. So some examples include naranx in Hungarian, portokali in Greek, chenzi in Mandarin, som in Thai, taronja in Catalan, sintale in Nepali, and I could go on and on. So these words are the same for both the fruit and the colour, and these words are called homographs. Now, there are yet more examples where the terms employed are not identical, but they're very similar. And I'll give you a hint here, the ending in these languages gives away if the word is the adjective, the colour, or the noun, the fruit. So do take care at looking at the suffix. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We have l'arancia, which is the Italian for the fruit, and arancione for the colour name. This also works in Arabic, portocal for the colour, but portokali for the fruit name, naranca in Croatian for the fruit, narancasto for the colour, santra in Hindi for the fruit, santria for the colour, also works for Amharic as well. So there are other languages that help make the distinction between the fruit name and the colour name by actually specifying if it is the colour name by including the word for colour in the translation. Ingenious. So a few examples, we have Sardinian, we also see that in Cantonese, so kang is the Cantonese word for the fruit orange. Kang sik means the colour orange, so sik means colour. In Yoruba, we have osan for the fruit and awo osan for the colour. Again, Burmese follows this, Assamese follows this, Telugu, and the list goes on. So if only all languages followed this, it would be a lot simpler to learn, wouldn't it? But probably a lot less interesting too. So this is the joy of linguistics. Okay, so I don't want to leave etymological links out of the picture here, so let's focus on some more themes for a moment. So have you noticed that the sound Portugal is shared across various languages, such as Greek, Turkish, Arabic, Romanian, Bulgarian, Albanian, Kurdish, Macedonian, and Turkmen? And there's another root that's traceable through languages too, and it's naranja or naranja, which we've seen in Spanish, Italian, Hungarian, Croatian, Persian, Gujarati, Telugu, Sindhi, Pashto, Georgian, Armenian, and Tajiki. So we have established that there are indeed plenty of linguistic connections, not only between the words for colour and the fruit, but also between different languages spanning the globe. Of course, there are some other languages that follow no rule whatsoever. So we have Tibetan, which is Shaluma for the fruit and Lingwang for the colour. No relation at all between the two, and no relation with any other languages in the world. The same goes for Tamil and Maori and also Somali. Amazing. Okay, a final point here on oranges before we move on. The international Kunlang, Esperanto, opted for the root orang to represent orange. And I think that it's no coincidence that the brand name Orangina, a very popular make of orange fizzy drink, opted for this name, which works across 60 countries. The name has stuck to this brand for almost 100 years, and they've been very successful. But did you know that this popular drink used to be called Naranjina? Now, this was named after the original person who was Spanish, who actually was the first person to mix the drink, the chemist who first made it. And of course, naranja means orange in Spanish, in Castilian Spanish. So who knows if Orangina would have enjoyed the success and longevity that it has if it hadn't changed the name and adopted a name that was more internationally recognised. What is our main takeaway from our orange example? We can always find links and logic, but we can't always assume that these links are true friends if we're to avoid being misled. Our classic example here was oranges being referred to in some languages by employing a word that resembles another fruit, that is to say, apples. But did you know that lemon means orange fruit in Afrikaans, and in Hausa, lemon saki is also the word for orange. That's right, orange, not lemon. How did that happen? I can think of a few reasons why. It could have been a false calc that then stuck. Something happened in the passage of time to change the original meaning from the word that it was borrowed from, lemon. There could be other reasons too, and this is a classic example of how false friends can come about when words are borrowed or calqued and then the meaning changes. So the original meaning is still related, but it's changed. One more example in the same vein. So the word for car park in Spanish is el parking. Now, as a Spanish native speaker speaking English as a second language, you'll be forgiven for thinking that the sentence, I'll park in the parking, works in English, works fine, makes sense. But actually it doesn't make sense because parking is the verb form in English. And we say car park. So another false friend to watch out for. All right, so we've seen citrus fruits, and now we're moving on to a couple more, lime and lemon. Many languages use the exact same word for both of these fruits. For example, nimbu means both lemon and lime in Hindi. Kwachang means both lemon and lime in Vietnamese, lebu for both in Bengali, and it's the same for many other languages: Sindhi, Amharic, Nepali, Somali, Pashto, Chichewa, Kachi, Tigrina, and Wolof, and Samoan. So you can check out what these words are in the uTalk app, and you can also see them in the graphics on the screen. Now, usually you can figure out which root the person means from the context in which they're saying these. So you only need to learn half the vocab there. So think of it as learn one, get one free. You only have to learn 50% of the vocab, right? Win-win. But just like in the previous case of the homographs for orange and orange, while some languages use the same word, other languages have words that are very similar. For example, in Hausa, ilamuni is lemon and ilaimu is lime. Limoid for lemon in Irish and lioma for lime. Same rule applies for Malayalam, Slovenian, and Tajiki. Yet other languages go a step further to make the distinction between the two fruits clear, while still revealing the similarities between the fruits through the terminology employed. For example, in Brazilian Portuguese, o limão siciliano is lemon and o limão Tahiti is lime. Interesting that they make reference to the specific varieties of lemon and lime. This is Brazilian Portuguese though. Portuguese from Portugal use limão for lemon and lima for lime, possibly due to European influence. And in Brazil, possibly due to American English influence. Don't quote me on that though, I'm just surmising. So we also have to be careful with false friends between dialects of the same language. Now, moving on, many languages have chosen to call lime green lemons. For example, in Albanian, limon is lemon, but limon jeşil, jeşil means green, is lime. In French, we have le citron for lemon and le citron vert for lime. Although, again, like with Brazilian Portuguese and Portuguese, in Quebecois or Canadian French, it's citron for lemon and lime for lime. So we do need to watch out for dialectal differences. Okay, so some more examples of green lemons are the mandarin. So ningmeng is lemon, but quiningmeng means lime. So quin means green in Mandarin. Also, you can find examples of this in Arabic, Macedonian, Kurdish, and there's several more. Again, I'll let you go away and research that. Now, not only do we have green lemons, we also have sour lemons. For example, in Urdu, we have the word in Urdu, lemon for lemon and kata lemon. So kata means sour. And in Persian, we have limu for lemon and limu tosh. Tosh means sour. And my favourite one, in Malay, we have limau for lemon and limau nipsis. Now, nipsis doesn't mean sour. Nipsis means thin. So we have a thin lemon for lime in Malay. Amazing. Okay. And then again, in Javanese, we have another example. We have jeruk lemon for lemon and jeruk pesel for lime, which is interesting because jeruk peres is orange in Japanese. So linguistically here, they've chosen not only to link the lemon and the lime, but also the other citrus fruit, the orange, in with the same group of words. Brilliant. And then again, as you saw with orange fruit and orange colour, there are many examples also when there is no relation whatsoever. I'll just give you a couple of examples. So in Shona, lemon is dimu, but lime is ramoni. So no relation whatsoever. We could say the same for German, we could say the same for Greek and Japanese, also Swahili, completely different words. We also know that some translations have been calqued or transliterated from the English. So one example is Thai, which is lemun for lemon. However, they use their own word for lime, which is manao. Other examples are limon in Kazakh and lime for lime. Other examples include Azerbaijani, Belarusian, Uzbek, and a few others. So it's interesting to see how different languages have had a different approach when it comes to food and the natural world. And I'm sure we can think of some other examples where the same principles would apply. For example, grapes and raisins. We don't have time to look into this one into more depth, but I'd encourage you to go away and do your own research. Keep an open mind, investigate, see what you find, and yeah, do send me an email at languages@utalk.com. I'll leave the email address in the description so you can contact me if you find any. I would love to hear from you, or do feel free to put a comment. And yeah, we can all learn from each other and the different languages that we know. Amazing. So whilst we're on the note of transliteration and how we can consider these calques to be true friends in some cases, have you ever considered the case of country names and how they seem quite uniform across different languages? So one example that I looked into was for Mexico, since that's the country that we're hoping to be off to for the Polyglot Conference next year. It was originally named after the capital city that was called Mexico Tenochtitlan during the time of the Aztecs in the 15th and 16th century. So this name is actually stuck across translations all around the world today, from the Thai Mexico to the Irish Mesesio and the Ukrainian Mexica to the Kinyarwanda Mexique, and it's so easy to trace the original root. I actually couldn't find any exceptions to this, and I looked at a few different countries and many languages across this. So if you find any exceptions, please let me know. I would love to know. But there you go, that's another true friend for you if you're taking a guess at country names. Okay, awesome. So our last case study reveals some more transliteration, friends and foes, and it's another everyday word. Most of the world's population own at least one pair, and you'll probably wear them most days. Maybe you're even wearing some right now. Have you guessed it yet? That's right, trainers, or as the Americans and Canadians would call them, sneakers, or in Australian English, runners. Yes, it is definitely possible to get confused between different dialects of the same language, or even terms from your own native tongue. More on that later. The various dialects of English are not the only time where you'll detect the English language when it comes to this kind of sporty shoe. Let's take French as our first example. So in France, you will hear basket, which originally, presumably, came from the sport that's played whilst you're wearing them, namely basketball. And this is a word that's also been calqued from English, le basketball, or simply le basket for the name of the sport. And obviously this does not come from the English word for containers used to hold or carry things made from cane or wire, clearly. Now, French is not the only language to borrow from English. A number of other languages have borrowed directly from English too, such as Maltese, which uses trainers, Welsh, which has trainers, and Bengali, which uses trainer. We also have trainer boot in Marathi and running shoe in Tok Pisin, as well as rubber shoes in Tagalog and Ilocano. Interestingly, there are a number of other languages that use canvas in their translation for the word trainers. The English word for the material often used to make them. For example, in Igbo, we have canvas, as well as canvas in Fijian. Whilst we're on the subject of calques, Polish and Romanian have taken this to the next level by borrowing a brand name, a German brand name, which is Adidas, in naming the shoe. So, for example, in Polish they say Adidasi, and in Romanian also Adidasi for the name of this kind of shoe. So it will probably come as no surprise that, other languages have some form of the word sport in them for their translation of the name of the shoe. For example, in Spanish, they're called las deportativas. In Italian, it's scarpe da gimnastica. And in Dutch, it's sportschoenen, although in Afrikaans, it's tekkies. Many more examples include Hungarian, Hebrew, Greek, Turkish, Irish, Albanian, Slovenian, Pashto, Somali, Wolof, and Flemish. Other languages have opted to stay on the theme of sport when naming this shoe by referencing the activities done whilst wearing them. For example, in Czech and Slovak, we have tenisky, and in Croatian, it's tenisy. Other languages that include reference to the sport tennis include Brazilian Portuguese and Malagasy. But there are other languages that reference other sports in the name of them. For example, running in Maori, we have hu'oma, which is their word for trainer, and it literally means foot run. We also have Malayalam and Amharic. Now, lastly, as you would expect, many translations include the word shoe in them. For example, in Greek, we have ta atletika papoutsia. Papoutsia meaning shoes, and atletika, you guessed it, meaning athletic. We also have similar examples for Swahili, Vietnamese, Arabic, Azerbaijani, and interestingly, a number of African languages have a word that sounds like zapato in them, which is the Spanish word for shoe. For example, in Tumbuka, we have zapato, Zazulu, and in Lingala, we have zapato and zapato, za marazeo in Chichewa. So this proves that cults can crop up from almost anywhere, so watch out for them. And finally, as we've seen with our other examples, some languages have gone completely off-piste and made up an entirely new word for this item of vocabulary. So, for example, we have Turnschuhe in German, Tosud in Estonian, Kala in Saronian Kurdish, also Ukrainian, Mongolian, Catalan. They all have their own word for the name trainer. So what can we learn about false friends from trainers? Well, firstly, that when you hear a borrowed name for the name of a sport in a language, it may not actually mean the sport itself, but what is being worn on the player's feet to do that sport. Second thing we can learn is when all else fails, you can try describing the item, for example, by saying the shoes that you wear for playing X sport, which is a great lesson for any new item of vocabulary you're not sure about during a conversation in a new language you're learning. And finally, remember that even in different varieties of the same language, it is possible for confusion to occur, such as the first example we saw between Australian, Canadian, American, and British English. Not only that, but it is possible to fall into a false friend trap at home. Yes, even in your own native tongue. A final false friend anecdote before we close to prove this point. I recently went to the pub for a drink with some friends. Now, the waiter brought my bottle of cider over with a glass full of ice to pour it into. And it was a cold evening. I did not want the ice in my glass. So I wanted to ask the waiter to throw the ice in my glass away. But in the moment, I simply couldn't think of the word for glass. I kept thinking glace, which is French for ice. So in the heat of the moment, I ended up saying, "Can you throw the glass away?" I meant, "Can you throw the ice away?" Oops. So, some final thoughts. Fact. You will encounter many, many false friends along your language learning journey. But being aware of some common false friend traps you're likely to fall into will help. And then, if you do, or should I say, when you do fall into some false friend traps, be quick to be corrected and learn from your mistake before it becomes fossilized, particularly if it's a word or term that you're using with great frequency. Making a false friend boo-boo is funny the first time, but it's not so funny 5 years down the line. However, don't forget to be able to laugh at your mistakes. And be forgiving of others who make linguistic mistakes, and be quick to correct them too. Thank you for listening to my talk. And as I mentioned before, it would be brilliant to hear from you. Please send me a message at languages@utalk.com and share your own false friend anecdotes with me, or write in the comments section. I'll look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Bye.